Hello, everyone, whoever is out there. We are bringing you a new Ask a Therapist, and Brian was nice enough to join me. Brian, my husband, again on the couch.
Hi, everybody.
It's been, I think, about a year since we did the last one. And we may have had some scheduled, but just, I don't know, like the rest of you, everything has fallen through the cracks for the last year. We are, I'd like to say getting our heads above water, but I'm not even sure that's the truth.
Nope. I'd say no.
No, probably not. Okay, the way as much as anybody else's.
Right.
But the reason that we decided to do this now is we've actually both been reading a lot of the articles that have been out about how much women are suffering lots of people are suffering during the pandemic. Let's be very clear. But as I'm sure lots of you have seen, there's been a ton of articles. The New York Times has done several pieces. I think the Washington Post, Time Magazine. Oh, there's numerous others where they're just talking about women, especially women who have jobs outside of the house and or are trying to homeschool kids and or just trying to work in general, have been struggling. I think close to 1 million women have left the job force. Any of you who are trying to do that in homeschool recognize that that is virtually impossible. And the biggest thing for me, as any of you who know me know, but for those of you who don't know, my thing is that I always want to let people know that relationships are not easy. They can be very hard. There are lots of things working against you during, I don't know, all the time to make relationships.
Not just a pandemic, right?
Right. And so that you feel less alone, that you understand that you're normal, and that this stuff about who's working when, who's caretaking who, all of that has significant impacts on the relationship. So today we're talking specifically about equitable division of labor in the household. And in particular, I mean, we're going to talk about all kinds of labor, but we're going to talk a lot about invisible labor. Some of you may know the term the mental load, the emotional load, any of those things. We'll kind of reiterate stuff in terms of how we're defining it or where we're getting those definitions from along the way. Feel free to put a shout out if we're talking about stuff that doesn't make sense or you aren't familiar with the term. But Brian was kind enough. We actually thought that it might be useful to just share with you guys our path, bumpy ass road about how we've done this. And so that you guys know, like, we get it. We've been there. We are there. It's something that's always a work in progress. But
we were there this morning.
We were there this morning, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, bumping along.
Yeah. So why don't we get started?
Let's do it.
Okay. So Brian and I have been married for 20-something years.
Uh-huh. More than 20,000.
A lot.
Yeah.
Yes. So when do you think the equitable division of labor, which is probably not the term we would have used, but like when do you remember it kind of showing up in our relationship? Or the first, like, how long ago has it been there?
So I think my first memory of it would probably have been maybe our second to third year of marriage, right after our honeymoon phase. No, just kidding. And I think, you know, a lot of it was basic stuff, like things that I think about now. If those were the only things we had to worry about, we'd be hitting grand slams every day. But it was essentially like, you know, about cleaning the house or preparing for family to come or, you know, being thoughtful about buying gifts or, you know, stuff that, you know, my parents used to do for me that I just never really thought about.
The stuff that just kind of poof, magically happened. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, my mom calls that FM, fucking magic. She's like, oh, fucking magic, it's just done. Yeah, I remember pretty early on too. For some reason, that sounds like the same amount of time. A couple of years in, we had moved to San Francisco, and I just have these visions of being in one of our first apartments there. It was the one that was big enough that actually required some cleaning. The first one was like a closet, so you didn't do much there. But I can remember having these debates about who was doing what, and it would often go like this. Like, I would talk about something that wasn't happening around the house that I was frustrated that I felt like I was doing, if it was cooking or meal planning or cleaning or dog stuff or whatever. And I would say to Brian, like, why is it my job? And Brian would say, well, I don't think it's your job.
Yeah. course.
And I'd say, well, if it's not your job,
whose job is it?
if it's not your job,
right.
and it's not my job, whose? And you would look at me blankly.
Yeah. And then I go.
But I think you genuinely weren't trying to be a jerk. I think you actually didn't. It wasn't like you were some sort of old school you're the little woman, you need to do this stuff.
No.
Well, okay, so tell me, what was at that point for you? I know very much what was going on in my head at the time, but what was happening for you then? How were you making sense of what my issue was?
Well, also keep in mind that we were babies at the time, so my male brain probably wasn't as fully developed as your female brain.
Maybe, or just no one's brain.
Or nobody's brain.
Neither.
It doesn't have to be a male-female thing as far as that goes, but I seem to recall genuinely believing that it wasn't your job, and genuinely believing it wasn't my job. And I think, to be frank, a lot of it was stuff I didn't purport to care about, right? It was I really don't care if the house is clean when our parents come to visit, or I really don't care if we have a lot of fresh food in the house. We'll just go get it when we want it. Why do we need to stress out about this kind of stuff?
Yep.
It just seems so simple.
Right. So essentially, it was my issue.
Correct.
I was being
you figure it out.
Over the top or something about these things.
Right. I mean, I was never stupid enough to say you figure it out, but I'm sure there was some dialogue in my head that was just my goodness.
Yeah.
Why are we worried about this stuff?
Which is funny, because I would imagine if I had just let things go to the point that it was totally disgusting. You have a lower tolerance for gross.
I would have flipped out
about a lot of things. I'm not a neat or clean person by nature. It's something I've definitely grown into. Let's be very clear about that. I remember a big one was about gifts for each other's families, and that was one that always blew my mind, because I knew that if we had actually flown home for Christmas and your family didn't have any gifts, that would have bothered you. But I think this is where we get to the invisible part of things. I think you genuinely just didn't know, because most often the stuff was just there.
Yeah.
They were good gifts, the meals were just there, the dog just had food, all that stuff.
And I'd like to find somebody to blame, but there's really nobody to blame. I mean, I think things happened, whatever your childhood was like things just happen as it does for all kids, but I don't know that I was ever part of the process then, and I never really put a whole lot of thought into it.
Yeah. Well, we had to do a ton, so I remember very clearly thinking that when I got married to someone, it was going to be a very egalitarian marriage. I expected total one-to-one kind of relationship where we both did a lot of everything. I had a lot of that language in my household. I mowed the lawn and I dusted. Same with my brother, right? There were no girl jobs and boy jobs. Everybody was supposed to do everything. And I just was well, of course, that's what will carry over. And I'm not sure that you have the same.
My experience was a little different.
Okay.
I think the gender roles in my home were more traditional. I don't recall, again, it's all kind of fuzzy. I don't recall my sister doing any more work than I did.
Yeah.
Or anything like that. I don't remember doing much.
Yeah. Of anything. Well, also too, you probably didn't see a lot of
I would wake up in the morning and the house was clean,
right?
And I would open the refrigerator and there was food there. I would come down on Christmas morning and there were presents, So I don't think I'm a lazy person necessarily. I just don't think that I ever really thought about it.
And I'm gonna guess that there weren't dads of your friends around that were doing a lot of the baking cookies for the bake sales at school, or driving you. Maybe driving to soccer practice, but not taking responsibility for it entirely.
It would have been more of a unicorn situation than it is now.
Yeah, to have that happening.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't. It wasn't even a consideration.
Yeah,
they might coach your basketball team. And that was about it.
Yeah,
that I recall.
Yeah,
there was certainly help, but as far as domestic sort of stuff.
It was just not.
I don't. Yeah, there was not a lot of direction.
Yeah, I wrote a blog piece about this, and this issue between the two of us was very much what got me exploring about.
I like to call it an opportunity. not an issue.
That's right, this opportunity. This opportunity, like, you know, a long, long time ago got me really interested in looking at this because I was hearing some of this, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I was hearing some of this stuff from my friends, and we're talking about, like, these weren't dudes who were jerks. They were thoughtful, you know, guys who really wanted to do well, but yet this seemed to be consistent. So that's a little later down the road, I think, when kids came in. Okay, so this started early. I think I had really strong feelings about it from the beginning and have very strong feelings about gender equality, period. And pay attention to things that maybe sometimes not everyone is. And I definitely, it was even hard because I even wondered for myself, like, at this point in time, I don't know, well, one, I didn't have a lot of friends that were married. And two, I didn't necessarily hear these conversations happening with my friends. This is all pre-kids. So I would say that this continued to be a thing, right? I'm not sure we got through a useful discussion about it for
a decade.
Yeah, easily. We would, about once a quarter, or in rough times about more frequent than that, it would turn into a blow-up argument. I think we would probably both maybe scurry around to figure it out, but I think ultimately I did the bulk of the invisible labor. Although I will say, I started then dropping things a little bit at a time, where I was just like, well, I'm not gonna worry about birthday cards. I am not gonna and just like, I'm not gonna make sure there's food in the house and some of that stuff. But we also had enough flexibility that we just kind of sorted out.
Yeah.
And then we decided to have kids, and we were married for almost 10 years 9 years by the time we had our first child. And I would say everything changed from almost the moment we found out we were going to have a baby. Would you say?
I certainly had a weird sort of mental shift.
And what was that like?
Panic, anxiety.
Yeah.
I mean, more than I normally carried around on a daily basis. And I think that again, when I think about my role models and things like that, like, you know, I mean, my parents were wonderful and, like, you know, did their best, but I mean, I immediately am, like, thinking about the television shows I watched, and I'm like, oh, Leave It to Beaver, or, you know, the Brady Bunch, or, you know, whatever it is, where, like, holy mackerel, man, I better, you know, put my head down and start making some money, keep this ship afloat.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know this at the time. I know this now, but it seemed like and this is where I think, this is the thing where I think these gender role bullshit things that we push on people still serve neither or both or all, right? Like, we have a wide range. Thankfully, we have more options in terms of gender anymore. It's not so binary, but like this expectation about how you fulfill your role in life and all of that thing in a relationship. You know, you got fed a lot of BS about your role being a good dad, a good husband was to be a provider.
Yeah.
And I think I didn't know at the time that kind of doubled down when we decided to have a baby, and you really directed your attention there.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I was pregnant, whatever, we got through, but we started to get towards the end of the pregnancy, and we lived in California at the time, and they had they were really ahead. I mean, this was a while ago now. They were really ahead of the curve in terms of parental leave. It was for all parents. It was for if you give birth to a baby, adopt a baby, have an aging or ailing family member or parent, you got 12 weeks, and most of it was at least partially paid. It was unbelievable and unheard of, and we were... So I mean, this is where also the communication was lacking. I just was like, well, of course, I'll take my 12 weeks, then you'll take your 12 weeks, and that'll be amazing. We got 24 weeks dialed in with our baby when we first, right? So it was probably a week or two before he was actually due to come. And we were driving in the car, and I said to you, so how long are you going to be off work when the baby's born? And you said, what?
A few days.
Yeah. And I don't know.
I think what I said was, well, I really want to save some of my vacation for, you know, down the road a little bit,
right,
in case, you know, when you go back to work, I need to do some stuff or something along those lines. The thought really didn't cross my mind. And I think when it did, it was just kind of like, again, all the voices in my head and all these, these things that I've heard and again, you kind of gravitate and pick up towards things that resonate. And, I think part of it that I was hearing and thinking about was, if I'm gone for 3 weeks, I mean, they don't need me, right? They'll replace me, and, then we're going to be on the dole with a brand new baby. I mean, it'd be like,
Yeah, but I mean, I think
like
that
a Christmas story.
That was echoed, though. I mean, I think in the culture in which you were in work-wise, like, you were hearing those things. I remember there was a guy you worked with that took off the leave that California had. And I mean, you can imagine the names that guys called him. And there was definitely this notion of like, well, if you can afford to be gone, like, don't bother coming back. You must not be needed. And I think it's safe to say also in that realm, and I think this is still true today, a lot of people that were at at the higher levels of, leadership in big organizations and companies, and this is part of what a lot of these articles have been talking about recently. It is a system that is designed to have a parent stay at home in order to allow that person to work hours that don't make sense when you're trying to raise a family or take sick time or get kids to and from school and activities and whatever else. And we were now seeing this up close, but not knowing. And so it became a huge conflict. So again, if you guys know me, you know probably to an annoying degree how much I bring in like social and cultural things about it. But part of that is so that this isn't hard just because something's wrong with you. This is also hard because the systems set up make it hard. And also, as we know, I hope everybody knows at this point, if it's hard for us, it's 10 times harder for any woman and family of color in this country, right? If you think we have things made like challenging, there are other obstacles in the way, right? So I just want to I will be repeating that. And again, for anyone who's just joining us, we are talking about equitable division of labor in households. A lot of the
invisible.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Invisible labor. And Brian and I decided we would share our own story about it just to sort of open the conversation and talk about, where things get sticky, I think, for a lot of people. So, needless to say, we had our first baby, and I think things exponentially got tough.
It got hot real fast.
Yes.
And we moved across the country in the midst.
Right. So it was a timing thing in which, like, I never actually went back to my job that I had there because we were about to move. We got to Chicago. I had trouble finding a job, and Brian also started a new position in which he was traveling like 4 or 5 days a week. So some of it was pure logistics, but a lot of it was just things were happening. Brian was gone. He was doing his role, right? Like, I think you felt like you were doing all the right stuff.
I think that, and I think if I'm real honest with myself and the audience for that matter, I think that the travel was an opportunity for me to avoid a lot of difficult discussions and situations and unpleasant things. It was certainly easier for me to get on an airplane and fly away than change diapers and do all those other things. And then, then I'd float in and take the baby on a Saturday for a couple hours, and I would anticipate a blue ribbon when I walked in after that because, I was so generous enough to give Kate a few hours by herself.
Yep. You were the hero.
And funny enough, it never happened.
Well, actually, let's be clear. It happened everywhere else except for at home. Brian would take our oldest son to the grocery store with him. They had a little routine. They'd go out to breakfast. And all along the way, servers at restaurants, people in the grocery store were like, oh my God, it's amazing you have your baby with you. And like, people would tell me all the time how lucky I was to that Brian would do that. And I'd be thinking, I've been home by myself for the last 6 days.
Right.
Where Brian would be calling me from San Francisco, where he was out to dinner at a fancy restaurant with all of our old friends. And I was at home with the baby, who was my only companion at the time, eating black beans and rice with him while I drank my wine by myself at the kitchen table. It was like not exactly.
Right.
So there was resentment on that front, but I think things got more split, right? Like I was the only one who knew when his doctor's appointments were.
Right.
I knew when he was growing out of clothes. I knew that he had diaper rash, and the one kind of thing that we used before wasn't working. And again, this is partially where systems get into play, right? Like it's set up that if we're going to structure it where in order for Brian to do the job that he had, he needed to have somebody that was really around all the time, like, he just wasn't around. Like, I was there all the time.
And changing jobs was never an option.
No.
I mean, of course it is at this point, like, but in that time, like,
Yeah.
everything felt so tenuous to me in my head. Like, the construct that I had come up with was like, you know, my anxiety telling me, like, don't screw this job up, like, you've got to pay these bills, like, now you have this child, like, it, you know, a year and a half ago you two, you know, could have eaten cat food and lived in a cardboard box for a while and probably been okay, but now we've got this baby and, you know, the stakes have just gone through the roof. And just to kind of circle back real quick, if I can, like, you know, you talked about, like, I was thinking about reinforcement when you were talking about all the people that were kind of blowing me up for hanging out with the baby. And I think, like, we mentioned, like, these, you know, sort of like apparent or invisible, you know, ways that society kind of reinforces these gender roles and these, you know, things. And, like, clearly, I mean, I you know, I ate that up. You might as well, like, put whipped cream on that for me. I was like... You know, I mean, half the time, you know, I've probably taken him out to breakfast just so I could, you know, toot my horn.
It's like when you walk your friend's puppy to get people to pay attention to or find someone to date. Brian was just kind of doing that with our child. And then I'd call my parents, and her parents would be like, guess where I was today? And they'd be like, oh. And then Kate would be like, me. You know, so... Yes.
That went on for a little while.
Yes, and I think, too, when it became, you know, finally I was starting to get some traction on getting a job, and then I was back to working like a 40-hour week out of the house, 9 to 5, you know. We had to figure out all the childcare stuff and the detaily things, but what was interesting was throughout the time that I wasn't working out of the house, let's be clear, I was working a lot and hard and oftentimes all night long, but not getting a paycheck for it. But so... Even I, at the time, struggled to feel like, okay, well, I am at home. And, you know, that's like, in the balance, like, that probably made sense that I was picking up some more stuff. But then I was back at my job, you know, 9 to 5, pretty standard hours, and nothing changed.
My life didn't change.
We continued to keep the same split of who was doing what. Right. And, like, Brian would find out on, like, a Sunday he had to leave on Tuesday for the rest of the week. He would, thanks, Kate, see ya. Not bad an eyelash about what that would entail. I was running to the train, home from the train to get home in time to get our son from childcare before the every 15-minute fee would come into play, rushing home to get him fed, you know, do the whole thing. And I think that, I would bring this up to you, right? And I think I was more and more angry as things went along. It felt unfair, and I think I would also often... Look, this whole, like, sociocultural thing is not new for me. I bring it into my home life, too. So I know I was bringing in this, like, this is bullshit, gender stereotypical nonsense. And when I would bring that up to you, what was usually, like, how would you receive it?
I would open my arms and open my... No, I'm kidding. Sorry. I couldn't help myself. I would get real defensive. And I would immediately think about the economics and logistics of what I felt like I was bringing to the table. And I, you know, again, I mean, I think when you flip immediately being defensive and you don't put any empathy in there, you know, I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I have to do this. Like, we have no choice.
Right.
Like, you know, we live in Chicago. It's not cheap. Like, we want to do these things. Like, you know, maybe you just don't understand what I'm doing. Right? I think it was like... I think I was quick to, you know, try and mirror her resentment and be like, well, you know, I may not understand all of you, but, like, I don't think you're putting any effort into, you know, all the things that I'm going through on a daily basis. Yeah,
definitely. Well, and I think, you know, I remember we had a really illuminating conversation. We were driving, I think, back from somewhere far away, and we were talking about privilege of, like, not having to think about things and how that's privilege, and we started talking about this kind of stuff. And I said to Brian at one point, I said, because what would often come up for us too, and again, this is where some of the invisible labor comes in, about how you make sense and who has to make accommodations. Eve Radsky, I'm going to get to her more because thank God for this woman, and she talks about this all the time, about whose time is valued and who gets to, you know, have space that is protected of their time and who doesn't, which I think you know which direction that tends to go. But I would say things to Brian like, well, you need to ask your boss if you can leave early because I have a conference I have to go to. And he would say, I just can't do that. It doesn't work that way in my business. And I was like, it doesn't actually work that way in mine either, but I have these conversations. And we would butt heads, and I think you very much felt like I didn't understand where you were coming from, and I certainly felt like you didn't know where I was coming from. And I remember saying to you in the car, like, okay, when I was pregnant, like, how many nights did you lay awake worrying about the hard conversations you were going to have with your boss about having to go feed the baby, leave because he was sick, get him to childcare, leave right at 5 to be on time? Like, how many times how often did you worry about that? And you said what?
I think when you brought it up was probably the first time I thought about it.
Okay, so I've actually written about this a little bit because I've had this conversation with other couples and I've woven it, but I mean, I felt like that actually hit home for you a little bit because my answer was every single day from the moment I found out I was pregnant. And I think there, again, systemically the way we do work is problematic, but I think oftentimes women have had no choice but to have hard conversations with their employers to say, I have to go pump in the other room, or my kid's school just called and they're sick and I need to go pick them up. And they're equally hard. I think there's just been this expectation. And then there's also this well, you're judged if you do, you're judged if you don't. I mean, I've had a lot of feedback about my hours that I keep at work and what's happening with my kids, who's watching my kids. And
not from me.
No, never from me.
Let's be clear.
Let's be clear.
You'd see my black eye.
So that was a big one, and I feel like that at least we crossed over into something that looked a little more like understanding. Would you say?
A little
at
bit.
That point?
A little bit.
Yeah.
But and I think it's funny. I think a lot of that, again, to be transparent for the audience, I think a lot of that was still not a tremendous amount of empathy on my part, but more of again, I'm not a complete idiot. It was kind of like, let's keep the peace. Here's a list of 4 things. If you do these things, then you will avoid, unpleasant conversations, and there'll be more harmony, right?
This is a theme you're going to hear a lot from Brian about if I do X, will we keep the peace? It's a real strong motivating factor for him, but it's helped us in the long run. It's gotten us. It was like the means to the end.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't want to ask you to speak for all men everywhere, but if you think about people who are in similar situations to us where there's 2 parents, they're trying to maybe have careers and raise kids and do all that, and I know that this is not an argument that we were alone in having. I mean, It was actually so validating when I started to talk to other people and they would sort of confess they were having these same frustrations, and it was more and more and more. I mean, to be totally frank, it's part of why I started doing couples therapy, because I was intrigued by the fact that this was such a huge issue in so many relationships. So what do you think is do you think that a lot of guys feel the same way that you do, that it's been a combination of social programming and privilege and models? Do you think there's something else?
I think there's a lot wrapped up in it, and again, I'm certainly not a representative for all mankind. I think that again, we talked, and this isn't about privilege, but I think that again, we're super fortunate in that we both have pretty good careers and we can pay the bills, and I think that I think men just don't have a lot of really strong modeling to make it something that feels normal, right? You weren't talking about this with you, but me and my friends were talking about this every time we were together. My friends and I barely speak when we're together, let alone have deep conversations. I mean, that's only started recently. So it was never something that we talked about. And one of them may be listening right now, but I think the conversations we would have are Jesus, man, I'm such a good guy. I don't yell, I don't scream. There's no abuse in our house. I mean, maybe there's a little bit of mental and emotional, but what is she? Why can't she just be happy?
Yeah.
Everything, it could be so much worse for her.
Yeah.
She got really lucky with me.
Yep.
I'm doing all these things, and you can go down the list and say, I do this, I do this, I do this, and again, that's all very metric driven or action oriented. But I think the piece that's missing a lot, we mentioned, is just being able to truly empathize with what your partner is dealing with, and like not do it just to be, kind of like a task-based sort of fight avoidance situation.
Yes. I love that.
I don't think I answered your question.
You totally did.
Okay.
No, I mean, I think empathy is a big thing, right? And some of it is like, if you don't have the experience of it, like you can't, force yourself into someone, but you can imagine it. But first you have to be open enough to hear that and like be willing to imagine it, I guess. And it sounds like that's that invisible piece, right? Like, and if you don't, also, if you're perceiving, and I think that you would agree this is true, if you're perceiving it, like when I'm telling you I'm upset about this doesn't feel fair to me, as an attack that you're doing something wrong, not just like we need to balance the scales,
for sure.
It makes it a lot harder, and you weren't so inclined to go into empathy.
Right, and I think that's part anxiety, part like conflict avoidant, like to the extreme, and then like you said, like not being able to see it as a conversation versus a personal attack.
Yeah.
Like I think that I spent way too many years, and I think a lot of men can relate to this. Like you just kind of feel like, well, I'm doing this, that, and the other. Why am I still being criticized or attacked when it's not necessarily you coming to me and saying, man, we got to figure out these groceries.
Right.
It isn't you coming to me to say, you lazy piece of shit, like, why don't we have good food to eat? It's kind of like, can we actually have a conversation about it and come up with a plan? And it's all about communication, right?
Yeah.
Like, but I don't think you can communicate openly and honestly if you're coming from a place of defensiveness or like, I mean, I keep saying anxiety or like fear of like getting in trouble, so to speak.
Right. Yeah, it makes it hard to dig into, I think. And I would say what I hear in my office absolutely echoes what you're saying. Like, I probably heard it better from the couples in my office because I had a degree of distance from it than I could from you, to actually recognize that, like, because I often felt like, how the fuck can you not see this? Like, that's just ridiculous. And it felt like you willfully didn't want to. And,
like it was intentional.
Right. But I do, and again, this is not a pass, right? Like, I would say across the board, if your partner is coming to you and saying, this thing is upsetting and or hurting me, whether or, and this is for a bigger conversation for another day probably, but like, whether or not you fully get it, it's your job, if you want to be a good partner, to stop and listen. And if you don't get it, ask more questions. But like, if someone keeps coming and saying, this hurts, this sucks, it feels bad, it's not fair, I don't like it, and you're just like, I don't want to hear it, or I think this is ridiculous, it feels a little gaslighty. And I certainly felt that way along the road that we had. Was that, I mean, I think there was a period of time that you outright said you have unrealistic expectations.
Yeah, I think maybe not exactly like. Or did I say that exactly?
You said those exact words.
Yeah, that sounds.
I mean, I think you were just protecting yourself to some degree, but
For sure.
but and then I would have moments where I'd be like, "Am I nutso? Like, is this ridiculous?" And also like, the rebellious person in me who cares about social justice was also like, "Well, fuck this, like." If I can't fight this in my own home, like, how am I, this needs to happen in the rest of the world, and, so things, as you can imagine, are escalating. Add another kid, another move, add grad school, jobs, the whole nine. It just kept getting worse and worse. And you tell me if you think this is true. I would say that there was a period of time in our marriage where this absolutely pulled at the core of it and made us combative and really unhappy for a long period of time.
For sure.
And it was really deeply rooted in this.
For sure. And I think it manifested in just a ton of resentment on both sides.
Without
question. I think you resented the hell out of me, and I resented the hell out of you, and, just couldn't hear each other.
Yeah.
At all.
It wasn't pretty.
No. No.
Yeah. So this went on, right? And then something started to shift a little bit. So where do you think, like for you, when did that shift take place?
Well, you had mentioned like, you had a career change, a number of years ago, and I think ultimately you just weren't available, so I think part of it was out of necessity. Like there were certain things that I had to pick up.
Yeah.
Like feeding the children. Like, again, not that I didn't do that sort of stuff, but I think a lot of it was like, hey, Kate, what are we having for dinner tonight? I'm happy to make it. So it's like, and in my head, I'm like, look at me taking care of business, Kate got all the groceries and stuff figured out, and I just have to execute. Like, she should be so happy. And like, I think that until, I was put in a position where I had to do a little bit more, again, just out of necessity, you start to kind of empathize in a real way with what you mentioned, like the mental pieces. Yeah. So it's one thing to execute, right? Like a lot of and a lot of people don't even do that. So
or like take directions. Right. That was the thing that drove me nuts. If you just tell me what to do, I was like, then I still have to figure it out.
Excellent at taking direction. But I think a lot of men are, right? I think a lot of men are happy to say, honey, what do you want me to do? Or they'll say, you do this so much better than I do. Just maybe you should just do it.
Yeah.
And I think men don't necessarily recognize, or partners or whomever, I think there are a lot of people that don't necessarily recognize that, the mental piece of that can be as taxing or maybe even more than just, physically, throwing something in the oven or, cleaning a bathroom or, whatever that might be. But I don't think that I recognized that until I started doing it. And even when I kind of like put my toe in the water a little bit, I don't think that I fully got it.
Yeah. Until, hold on. I see there's a question I gotta turn in. How can women better approach men with this? What is a good way to start the conversation? Fabulous question. I'm gonna let Brian answer that.
Well,
again, Brian is the representative for all men.
Yes, speaking for men.
But genuinely, if you think about...
So here, let me preface this with, it's a fantastic question, and I think... let me just give Kate just a tiny little bit of credit. I think that she is very thoughtful about these things, and I think she approached me in 1,000 different ways. So you may not like this answer, but this is kind of coming from my gut. Like, she would come softly. She would write it down. She would send me an email, maybe a text. She would do it over dinner. She would do it over breakfast. Maybe in bed one night. Like she would scream.
Yeah.
She would scream. She would yell. She would be really upset. She would shut down. She would send me a carrier pigeon with a note on it. Like, you name it, and she tried it. The problem was I just couldn't hear it, right? I had never, let my guard down enough to hear it as not a criticism, but as a cry for help is a really extreme way to, kind of define it. But, like, I never looked at it as an opening to a bigger conversation or a way to kind of shift the dynamic. For me, it was an attack. It was something I needed to defend. It was like, I'm a good person. I know I'm a good person, and I can't, anything that's kind of chinking at that is a problem. So I would say, I'd love to say don't give up, like, keep kind of asking, but a lot of the, maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead, but like until I kind of really got in it and started sort of exploring the topic a little bit on my own, did I fully kind of accept that it was a thing.
Yeah.
And Kate, we kind of talked a little bit about the shift where, Kate just got really busy, was gone multiple nights a week, and I was just kind of like in it. Fortunately I stopped traveling. My role shifted a little bit with my company, so I was here, and I had a little bit more flexibility in my job. I probably would have had the flexibility in the other role too. I was just afraid to ask for it. But most men like it to be their own idea, and I'm not immune to that. So I think that, like, I would find these articles, and like I kind of like dug in a little bit, and I don't know why. Maybe we had a terrible fight, and I was looking for ammunition to kind of fight back.
Well, I think that I'm sorry, I don't know, but like that. I mean, I think you're getting at something actually that's really important, and I loved the question, and I wish there was a really good answer to that. But I mean, unfortunately, it got to kind of a fuck you point. I mean, it wasn't just that I was busy and not around. I had slowly been over time just dropping stuff like, fine, no gifts for anybody. Like that doesn't happen. It's on you. It's not like I won't plan holidays. I won't plan groceries. I'm not going to tell you when the kids' sporting events are. I'm going to put them on the calendar, or their after school stuff. I'm not going to tell you when the parent teacher conferences are. And stuff would get dropped, and I was just like, oh well, tough shit for you. I mean, it was, and then I went into my internship, and I was going to be working very, very late, like an hour away. And it wasn't like a, hey, I'm not going to be available. It was kind of like a, hey, guess what? Screw you. you're going to be alone. I'm not doing any prep for this, and you're going to have to it was trial by fire, essentially, because, like, we had, I mean, this is another area you guys might recognize, you know, stuff like traveling had been such a thing. If we were going to leave, I'd be running around like my hair was on fire, packing up all the stuff for the kids, especially when they were babies. And Brian would, like, get his bag packed and come down and be like, I'm good. I don't really know what else we have to do. And I would basically, like, shoot fire out of my eyeballs at him. And so those were some of the things I just stopped doing. Like, he would, and you are an amazing dad. You have always been super active, and that wasn't to, like, score brownie points. It's because you like to do that stuff. But, you know, he'd take the kids away, or I'd go out of town. And I certainly know people who feel like they have to prepare, leave food, and all, and I just stopped. I was like, nope. So there was some of that trial by fire, I think, that pushed it. But it's unfortunate that it got to that point.
Yeah.
But I think it got so ugly the year of my internship that at least that's what you had said to me. Maybe I'm remembering incorrectly, but, like, kind of in a desperate moment started trying to read it. Oh, because this was also the time when the mental load term at least came to me. Like, I was so thrilled that there was a term that I could, like, I was like, okay, this is not a thing I've made up. The mental load is a real thing. It is the invisible list I keep in my head that weighs me down. And I think the first few times Brian was like, oh God, she's got, like, a new vocabulary word, and I don't know what to do.
And now she's going to school for this. I am dead meat.
But it seems like that pushed you into doing some.
Yeah, and I think, you know, again, as a Y chromosome is wont to do, like, once it kind of became my idea, again, clearly not my idea, but I started finding things outside of what Kate was trying to say to me, probably the same language and the same sort of messaging. But, you know, it became something of interest to me. I think there was, like, a cool cartoon that came out. I mean, cool just because it was neat to look at, but, like, the topic.
You guys have seen it. It's like You Should Have Asked. It's a Frenchwoman.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, all that stuff. Like, as I kind of, like, and I think that's the empathy piece, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I think I finally got to a point. And again, please don't get any illusions that I'm really good at this stuff, because I shit the bed pretty regularly on it still. But, like, I think I finally started to recognize, you know, what Kate was going through, and, like, some of the things that were kind of triggering her, you know, and you know, the things that I was doing or not doing that were impacting the way we got along.
And, like, it was real.
Shit got real.
No, but, like, what I was upset about.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it was no longer like I was under some illusion. I mean, Kate's written a couple blogs about this, like, really start to understand, like, how young girls are raised and the things that they're told, and, like, how things have shifted, and, you know, again, almost like a guideline or a guidepost for women to say, listen, this is not 1950, like, we don't live on a farm, like, this is not the way the world works. But I think for a lot of men, it's kind of like, well, you know, you see your dad do some things your grandfather might not have done, and then you look at yourself and be like, man, I take my kid to breakfast and go grocery shopping every weekend. I'm hitting it out of the park.
Right.
Which is good, right? It's still a step in the right direction, but I think, you know, not necessarily being able to share in some of that, you know, difficult thought process that goes through, like, juggling all these other sorts of things. You know, it was a little eye opening, and certainly, you know, kind of helped our relationship, I think.
Yeah. And I think, again, like, this is something that I was experiencing at home, and it was being echoed in my office. I had more than one male partner in a heterosexual relationship come in and say, like, they had read an article. There was a big one that came out. I don't remember if it was New York Times, or this was, you know, more than probably 10 years ago now. But, and say, oh, I finally get this is what my spouse has been telling me. And I, you know, my ears perked up, and I said, what is it about this? And I think you echoed this a bit, is that it seemed less threatening, or I don't know. I mean, some of it, again, still makes my brain hurt, because it's like, I feel like this happens a lot. Women talk and talk and talk. We know this happens in healthcare, and people go like, oh, honey, you're so dramatic. Oh, you're hysterical. Oh, you're over emotional. Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And then nobody listens, and then finally somebody does. So that part doesn't make me happy.
For sure.
And that took a while, but
yeah.
Then, okay, so at that point it opened up a bit of a conversation. I mean, Brian started using terms that I was like mental load, emotional, but also backing it up to some degree, right? Like, that year that I was basically gone all the time and doing 8 million things, I just, and it's not like I had to lower my standards or I had, because I don't like that one either. I don't like when we say that, you expect too much. Of course, there are people that do in their relationships, but this is the stuff that keeps our lives running. This is the invisible stuff that goes, like, your life runs better. You were able to travel 5 days a week when you found out 24 hours before because someone was going to get your kids up in the morning,
right.
Make sure they had food, make sure there was, something in the house,
Yep.
like get the dog taken care of, all of that stuff. So
Absolutely.
that is something I think that is really key that needs to be acknowledged. And I think that is what a lot of these articles recently, why they stood out to me. I mean, there was a stat in the New York Times thing about, like, even in households where both parents are working, women are still doing 50% more of the labor. And I definitely, this is another one I hear in the office about, like, whose time and whose job is more important. And we could go on for days about why our childcare system is so fucked up, and that is adding to all of this because we don't have what we need on that front, and that makes all of this worse. And to be totally frank, that actually started to change for us too. Like, we financially had been, it was like week to week for a very long time. And once I finished school and got out in the, world again and was like, we started to have a little more wiggle room. And this is one of those things, again, talk about privilege. When we had more room to get additional support, because we don't have family that live around us, we have amazing friends and we all, like, have each other's back, but, they're doing stuff too. When we could pay to have additional support, it lessened the conflict between us,
Right.
but that's not always an option, nor should that have to be the thing.
No, I agree. And I think there was probably a time in my life, too, where that didn't even feel okay.
Yeah.
Right? Like, with a newborn, I'd be like, well, no, like, you can't get help. Like, we have to, we have to do it. What I meant was she, she should do it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's...
Yeah. And I mean, this goes both ways. There's expectations about, like, who should really be the one with the kids and who they really need. And I believe that, and I think the research very much, just spit that a little bit, the research very much supports that, like, kids do best with as much time as possible with both parents, or however many parents are involved. That's good for them all together. Okay, so as you can see, this is a bumpy road. I'm imagining some of you out there will hear yourselves in the story. You may still be in it, right? And I would say so after that year, I think some of the tactical, logistical things started to change in terms of, like, we shared grocery stuff, laundry, some of the kids stuff, like planning out the 8,000 summer camps.
We implemented the big calendar.
We did. We got a giant calendar, and I think I just continued to kind of be like, whatever, dude, like, if it's your night and you haven't figured out dinner, and we started to map out more, even, like, who's taking care of breakfast. So there were some tactical things we did. And then I think the deeper issue stuff continued to happen, right? Which was, like, about, this is the whose time is valuable. I was in a new career. I was wanting to really, like, dig into it. I love what I do. I wanted to really push and was feeling very constrained by that. And we went back and forth about that for a long time about, you got to do your rising in your career because I was doing this stuff. When is my turn going to happen?
And I think that, I was, again, not stupid enough to say out loud that my job is more important than your job. But I think for, no.
I know.
Right? I'm not trying to be funny, but, like, I think that was truly, up until recently, within the last couple of years, like, something I truly thought was just like, well, she just
because of the salary difference?
Yeah, I think so. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I could make a mental checklist as to why, everything that I wanted was clearly the intelligent choice. Oh,
yeah.
So, and
it's
again,
funny because, like, we've come a long way, but that still makes my ears get hot, and I'm trying to, like, take my earrings off and maybe go after him, but I'm going to wait.
So this is a live event. We're in Skokie, Illinois, just in case anything goes sideways. I'm counting on one of you guys to send in some help.
Yeah. Okay, but that has been an issue. I think that's something that is still...
Absolutely.
So, okay, what then for you... I mean, I think you're simplifying a little bit about, like, you just thought your job was more important, but tell me about how you finally started to make sense of, or when it started to make sense to you, why, like, it was my turn, essentially. There.
Sure. I think part of it was I got over myself a little bit. I think
what prompted that?
Well, I think, again, on a lot of continuing marriage challenges for us, and, a lot of, big shifts and big changes and things like that. And I think, like truly being able to understand where you were coming from and, like, really getting into it, like, required me to take a couple more steps back. And, I mentioned, I've struggled with anxiety, right? So I think I was able to kind of figure part of that out. I started feeling better and a little more confident and a little less anxious about, my career, my job, and money, and all these other sorts of things. And again, like, super privileged to not have to worry a ton about that kind of stuff. But, like, it gave me the space to really kind of get in and try and see where you were coming from.
Can I make an observation that might put you on the spot a little bit? So, it does feel like, as we're talking, there is this little bit of a theme that, like, a lot of it is about, like, just when you got there, and it, like, when you decided that, or it took us to reach a point of really intense conflict, to the point, I mean, a lot of you guys know, we were separated for a couple years. This wasn't all of it, but this certainly added a significant amount to some other stuff that was going on. Like, what can we do to not get to those places where it's so intense? Like, if you were going to talk to your younger self and say something to them, and who knows if that younger self would have listened to, like, say, this is very real, like, you need to pay attention, this is not made up stuff, what would you say?
I think one of the things that I would say, and I think this is something that everybody struggles with, and I think a lot of men in particular, because we're, you got to be tough, you got to do these things, like, I think just, like, one, like, figure out how to be a good listener, right? Like, I'm a terrible listener, like, terrible. Like, and I have to work really hard to actually hear what you're trying to tell me without, these other 7 things, which is, like, defensiveness, prepping my response, like, all these other, so, like, really, really try and listen, because, if you're not hearing the other person, you got no shot, right? So it's that, and, like, deal with some of your own demons and some of your own anxieties and some of your issues for real. Like, don't just assume they're not, because I think...
How did you do that?
Well, it's with, like, therapy on my own, and, like, trying to be, again, I'm not super healthy, but, like, try to get a little exercise, meditate, whatever it is, like, get yourself into a good place so that you can hear these things. And again, like, if it's anxiety or depression or whatever it is, like, try and work on that a little bit so that that's not, like, a big block for you, right? Like, I couldn't hear the things that Kate was saying because it all felt like a personal attack, and, it was... I couldn't possibly, my damaged ego couldn't handle not being a good dad or, like, a good partner, or, whatever these things were. And like we mentioned earlier, like, well, we're not, like, assaulting each other every day and doing, cheating on each other, whatever it is. Right, but, like, those are the things, at the time, it was, those were the things that I could lean on, very black and white. But I would say really, like, for the guys out there, like, just try and listen, like, and don't take everything as a personal attack, right? Like, try and use it as a conversation piece. Like, I still struggle with that, like, as recently as, within the last 24 hours, right? Like, I mean, it's hard, like, to not, to take a conversation and not, like, kind of project that onto yourself, that you're failing at something. Like, nobody wants to feel like that. So I would say definitely, figure out how to be a good listener. And try and meet your partner, whatever sex they are or whatever, where they are, and, like, and just try and listen and be a little bit empathetic, and don't be so defensive.
I mean, I think that across
super easy to say
across the board, though, that makes it that makes it easier. But I think we need to be increasing these conversations. I mean, we're raising 2 boys. I know the conversations in our house are very different. And now I think we're at a place where we have a baseline. It was not easy, but we have a baseline that, like, there is a truth to this inequity. And that while you are not solely responsible for, like, all of the stuff that men have done forever... you are still part of that system and do perpetuate it in ways. And so that baseline understanding, I feel like, puts us at a different spot for our conversations now.
Yeah, totally. Well, I also, like, as a father of 2 boys, like, I think it's pretty important that like they see a model of as much equity as possible. And like another thing, like we mentioned, and again I'm kind of just zipping back to that real quick. I think be curious, right? Like I think that when I took the initiative to do it, and again I just skim. It's not like I'm reading 1,000 books, but like take a moment to be curious about it and find a website that you like. There's tons of websites like For Men now, like that are out there, like The Good Dad or Fatherly or one of those where men are writing these articles and it's coming from a male perspective, so it doesn't feel, even if it's you can't assume that it's because a woman's writing it, it's anti-men. Like we know that's not real, but I think also it you feel a little more validated if it's something that somebody that's gone through it, that's writing these things, and again, part of it for me was like I could pull a few nuggets out of there and start a conversation with Kate, and she would be like, "What?" And like getting that reinforcement, I was like, "Oh shit, I'm onto something." So like that, kind of reinforced like, "Well, I better keep digging on this stuff because." And again, it's just like it gets easier. It's like a muscle. You just gotta practice.
Yep. And then I would make a plug for, we're getting close to time to wrap up, but go into your workplace, like listen to your partner. This is someone you love and care about. Like hear what they're telling you is a real thing, and if you can do whatever you need to do to just hear it in a like non-defensive way. Like we all need to be bringing stuff to our partners in a soft startup. That's the ideal way to get somebody to listen, but like you guys out there need to be going into your workplaces and advocating for policies that help alleviate some of this stuff, and recognizing that if you have staff, to tell them all to go home and be with their families, or give them all space to do these things. Or I think when things changed a lot with us and we got to this more equitable place, and Brian leaves work as much as I do, maybe more now, to deal with kid stuff, he actually had a few employees say to him, you always talked about it, but now you actually do it, and it feels so much better to us. It actually gave them permission. And that's the example of like taking this out into the world, but also how it deeply affects your home life and your relationships. I mean, that's right. That's what I'm about, is relationships, big and small. And if you aren't going to address this stuff and you're going to continue to like push it aside, it's not going to get figured out. Oh, hold on. One more thing. Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you. Well, we are happy to share our story. I hope this has been helpful. It's really important, I think, for us to be as honest as possible about that it's not sunshine and roses all the time. And I mean, I'm supposed to know, like, and I do know how to do this, but it's hard in practice. Yep. But, you can get there. It just is going to really take both of you. So thanks.
And it's a work in progress, right? Like,
yes.
It might sail for a couple of months, and then you completely shit the bed. So
right,
just
it's an ongoing check-in. We have to keep if we don't pay attention to it, it goes off the rails pretty quickly for us. So it's just something that we make a priority to kind of be checking in about now, and have a better system of saying like, hey, I'm going to use a little more time for myself now, but I'll get you back later. So. Well, thanks for doing this again.
My pleasure.
Such a good guinea pig. Please don't hesitate to send any questions. You can put them in the Facebook chat. You can private message me. You can find me on Instagram. You can email me, kate@kateenglerrelationships.com. If you have questions for Brian, I will happily pass them along to him, and I'm sure he will be happy to answer them.
Careful with this.
But we are really grateful to all of you. I hope that in some way, shape, or form, this may help you at least feel a little bit more normal and know that you're not alone and that relationships are really hard. Take care, everybody.